Hi friends, Hannah here from the Cozy Cottage Crochet podcast channel. I have a really special video for y'all today. I had the opportunity to interview a true crochet legend. Seriously, when I got the email from this person's publisher, I squealed and ran down the hall to tell my husband. I couldn't believe that I was going to get a chance to talk to Dora Ohrenstein, she's a legend. She has written so many books. I own personally 3 of them, and I will show them to you. I will also link them down below. So there's the Crochet Every Which Way Stitch Dictionary. You can see that I have tabbed it, and it's an amazing resource, not just on crochet stitches, but how to increase and decrease them. It's phenomenal. There is one of her older books, which is Top-Down Crochet Sweaters. This book is very cool, very cool. It is also such a resource for sizing and really unique crochet garments. I love this cardigan. And then I also have the Crocheters Skill Building Workshop. So if any part of crochet scares you, you need this book because it tells you how to do all kinds of crochet things like color work, texture. It has a few patterns in here as well, but truly just, let me find, look at this. That's amazing. That's amazing. I need to make an entire cardigan out of that. So I will link those books where you can get them down below. But the reason I got to interview her is because she has a new book coming out and is all about Tunisian crochet. And so I got to interview her not just about the book, but about her story, crochet in general. We got a little philosophical at some points, and we end on such a beautiful sentiment to me, which is, she says, go where the questions are. Go where the questions are. And I wrote that on a sticky note. I have it on my little craft area because that's how I want to live my life. I want to go where the questions are. And I think as crafters, we do too, because crafting gives us the answer. So I hope that you enjoy this interview. There's a little bit of background noise. I tried to cut out as much of it as I could, but Dora lives in New York and there's a lot of background noise in New York. So I did my best. And I just hope that you will share some love in the comments, share some love by going to the link down below that tells you where you can pre-order her Tunisian crochet book. And I hope that you enjoy this video. I am so excited to talk to you. When Emily, your publisher, emailed me, I literally squealed a little bit. And I ran down the hall and I told my husband, and he was like, "Who's that?" And I was like, "You don't understand." Dora's a legend in the crochet world. So it is really just an honor for me to talk to you. And I am so excited. You have a new book coming out. And there are many other books, but I own 3 of them. I will put links to these in the description, but these are books that I bought myself and love. Crochet Every Way Stitch Dictionary, Top-Down Crochet Sweaters, that was the first one, and Crocheters Skill Building Workshop. I have these. They are well loved and marked all over. Cool. And I'm so excited that you're making a Tunisian crochet book. But before we talk about Tunisian crochet, how did crochet start for you? Were you crocheting when you were 5?
Not at all, not at all. My mom was not crafty in any way. And I grew up in my parents were World War II refugees. I'm an old lady. And their lives were interrupted, that was traumatic. And when they came here, what was on their mind for me and my sister was they loved classical music. So at 8, I started studying piano and singing and all those things. So I was very involved with being a singer and a musician for all of my adult life, and I had a really respectable career in the music world, which is that's a tough gig. right? It's super competitive. And anyway, I lived in New York my whole life, which is the only place you can, in US, you can do that. And so where did crochet fit in? I'm also of that generation that was very crazy in our college years. That was a very rebellious time. This is the late 60s, early 70s. So I dropped out of college, ran off to various places, and one of them was Amsterdam, where I purchased with $120 a tiny little houseboat, literally the size of a car. Okay, we had to go across the street to go to the bathroom, all right, like that. This was hippie time. And I think I had learned to crochet from a magazine. Now, why that came easily and how, I don't remember. But I remember we had a friend. Met this Dutch guy. That's how I ended up there, in this tiny little houseboat. We had a friend who had this shop, a weaving shop, with these giant cones of yarn. I'd never seen skeins. I knew nothing, I probably, whatever yarn I'd encountered was like, Woolworths.
Mm-hmm.
You even know what that is. So she gave me some of these things to play with. And, this is why I always often bring up this question of like how fearful many crocheters are. I just like, oh, let me see if I can make clothes. Knew nothing about it, but I sort of figured out increasing. And I made a couple, like there were even very wild colors like what you see here. I made a skirt and a cape. It so happened this little houseboat was parked around the corner from, Amsterdam is full of these little canals, right? This was right in the heart of town. And around the corner, there was like a chic boutique. And I brought my stuff over and she said, oh, I like it. I'll put it in the window. And I made 2 or 3 things and they all sold immediately. And nevertheless, I didn't pursue it too much. I was, doing whatever crazy stuff. And yeah, that's how it started. Then I, straightened out, went back to school, got my degree, and I literally did not pick up a hook until I was in my 50s.
Wow.
I had no time, I had no interest. It was like, music career is like all encompassing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, at that point in my early 50s, I wasn't performing, I was teaching. I felt like I really needed a creative outlet. And I just went back into it. And, even at that time, there were not that many books out there how to do. And I'm a big studier. I love books. I love to, I'm like that kind of frame of mind. Autodidact, I guess is the fancy word. So I got all these books that from the 70s, and a lot of them were knitting books, and I don't knit at all, or like very badly, right? But that's how I learned a lot of like shaping and garment construction. And then I'm sorry, it's a very long-winded answer, but maybe some of this is interesting. I found it a very interesting challenge, and this is going to lead us to Tunisian. How do you translate all this knitting stuff into crochet? Because they're working with these tiny little squares, and we are not, So that's been a lot of what drove me in writing books. And, like the designing was just a fun thing that, like, I can't draw. I have no visual. I never thought of myself with any kind of visual gifts. I can't draw worth it, right? I'm an ear person. I can hear. My ears are it. But I realized, you actually must have something because people like your clothes and, there must be something here, right? So that part was kind of, I guess, a talent that I discovered that I was very grateful. But all the books that I did were about, let's teach people to be confident with this. This is not difficult. You just have to understand. So, and since I already dropped that hint, why Tunisian has always interested in me, among other reasons, is it is more like knitting in that you can do these small stitches. So I really wanted to take my knowledge, especially about garments, to
Mhm.
the next level. And there were things that let me try this in Tunisian because in regular, you know what I mean? To be able to really master the concept.
So if someone has no idea what Tunisian crochet is, like I get the question because sometimes I will be doing Tunisian crochet and people will be like, "What is that?" And I'm like, "It's kind of
Right.
like a cross between crochet and knitting, but I don't really have
And
anything else
that
to
is
say."
what it is. And so, hon, I hope my whole long answers are not a problem for
No,
you
I love long answers.
because I'm like speaking paragraphs a lot. I think I want to answer that in a going back to history.
Okay.
And I guess, I have a friend named Carrie Karp, Carrie Karp with a K. He is an academic, very trained academic of history, and he has done extremely valuable work on the origins of Tunisian crochet. And if people are interested, he has a website. It's hard to digest some of what he writes, but it's in there. It's called loopholes.com. And look, Carrie and I are friends, and I've talked about this a lot. So there were always, knitting needles with hooks at the end existed in many places. Knitting is about 1,000 years old, maybe even older. But there's no old crochet, okay? Crochet is 19th century, maybe late 18th century. There's no old crochet. But all of this all the crafts, including knitting at home for leisure, erupted in the mid, 1845, right? More women could read, more middle class, this Victorian notion of women in the home, they don't work. Obviously, we're talking about a very special segment of the population, but this is what stirred the publication of 1 million craft books. Okay, so everything comes with economics. Already at this time, there were these hooks, these needles, knitting needles with hooks on the end, and people, needle workers, teachers, all, teachers of needle skills, which, young girls were taught all kinds of needle skills because it was valuable for them, right? They start experimenting, and next thing you know, something comes off that's Tunisian. Now, exactly when, where, we can't say, but the first crochet pattern is 1845. The first Tunisian pattern is about 10 years later.
Okay.
So what is it exactly? Instead of finishing each stitch as you make it in crochet, like in knitting, you can load all these loops onto your hook and have partial stitches. And then to work them off, what do the knitters do? They transfer it to the other needle or something?
Mm-hmm.
We use the hook to chain through those loops. So the return row is nothing more than a bunch of chains that are sitting between these loops, and right? So I don't know if that's good visual for it, but I think if people start to realize that that's all they're doing, and the different stitches in Tunisian are just different ways of picking up those threads so that the appearance on the surface look different.
So if someone is only knitting or they're only crocheting, or even if they do both, what is the appeal of Tunisian? Like what kinds of things can you do in Tunisian that you can't do in regular knitting or regular crochet?
I wouldn't say there's nothing can't, right? But what are the resulting fabrics you could talk about? So I think the kind of really, and I don't want to be somebody who's bashing crochet, but I think there are certain effects you can get with knitting in terms of fabric and drape that are very hard to achieve in crochet, although I'm always striving for it. And the softer and more flexible are your yarns, the more you can have a piece of fabric that's very much like knitting, that molds to the body well and all that stuff. So what's harder? Regular crochet, every stitch has several more wraps of thread. So by its very nature, you're working with something that's a little thicker and has a little knottier appearance.
Mhm.
So a lot of knitters like, ugh, right? They don't like that. People, then there's the historical connotations, right? People look at big rows of double crochet and they say, oh, that's so 70s, right? Or, how many TV shows do you see with an Afghan on the couch?
Mhm.
So there's stereotypes about crochet, right?
Right.
Now, Tunisian, okay, this is actually really important, so let me try to articulate it well. You have the two passes. So if you use the same hook for your Tunisian crochet, let's say you're working with a DK yarn, a double, and you would probably do that in regular crochet with a J hook. I'm not good with the numbers, but, fairly on the big side of your hooks. But in Tunisian, you're going to go to a much bigger hook because you're going to have the two passes. And because of that, it's so funny. I really need to write about this so I articulate it better. You actually end up, like I can use a bulky weight yarn with Tunisian and come out with a fantastic drapey fabric because I used an M hook and it's still a closed fabric. That's what you can't do with crochet, right? The only closed fabric is single crochet. And that's very dense because of the short little stitches, right? If I use doubles or trebles, there's space between each stitch.
Right.
So that's not really a closed fabric, right? There are cool ways you can avert that, right? This is why I use a lot of wavy stitches. Anything where the stitches are leaning and you get a little bit more of that closed feeling, right? So Tunisian gives us an opportunity to make a really closed fabric, in case you want to not have any nakedness and holes. And I'm very liberal. I wear things with holes all the time, but and even do it with a fairly thick yarn. So that's one amazing advantage and why I've I discovered it pretty early among these books that I got back in the day. Was an incredible 2 books that were made by Bernat Yarn Company of Tunisian crochet fashions. And they all look like Jackie Kennedy. I mean, it's the chicest stuff. Apparently Eleanor Bernat was very fashion New York woman. And, I looked at these and I said, oh my God, I got to learn how to do this, So that's one thing that I think is really different. Now, if you want to compare Tunisian to knitting, and I teach a lot of knitters who, you can get something that looks like knitting, but it goes a lot quicker because you're working with bigger stitches. And on the adverse to this thin, flexible project, you can get a really warm sweater that's going to keep you toasty. If you live somewhere cold, my Tunisian Tunisian knitting is very dense, right? Even you go to the highest hook size, those are the sweaters I wear on a cold day and I don't have enough heat in my apartment.
Right.
Finally, her paragraph is done, sorry.
No, I think that's great information. And I mean, it actually kind of bothers me sometimes when people demand that crochet be like knitting or that knitting be like crochet or vice versa. Like, I think that every fiber art has its own unique benefits and its unique qualities. Like there's plenty of people who love to wear crochet socks. I hate them because I don't like how they feel on my feet, but I love knit socks. And I find that Tunisian, it opens up a whole avenue that doesn't exactly exist in either of those spaces, especially when it comes to like color work and color play in crochet. It's a much easier to do in Tunisian than it is in regular crochet, to me.
That's so interesting. Tell me about that, because I would not have said that, but I'm not disputing you. Can you give an example?
Yeah, so one of the first Tunisian projects I made was just a regular shawl, like a bottom-up triangular shawl, and it used different colors on the forward pass and the return pass. And
That's what this is.
And it creates this magical blend of fabrics that in crochet, you can't really accomplish that because there's only one row. You can change every row, but you're going to get that line and it's not going to blend.
Right.
And I think that the way you can do that in Tunisian is kind of magical. And I don't really think you can do that in knitting either.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Mhm.
The closest you can get is like a helical circle. But yeah, the
Mhm.
color opportunities in Tunisian are endless to me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny because I would love to talk about that more with you, but maybe off camera.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm super curious, you're looking at it a little different than me, and that stimulates me. But yeah, so I think because what crochet can do that none of these can do is work in the round easily, make circles, and that's
Mm-hmm.
invaluable, right? If you want to make a hat, come on, it's going to work much better in crochet.
Mm-hmm.
Stitches. This is why I wrote that skill building book,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not my best-selling book. And yet I feel like it has so much crucial information as a foundation that every crocheter should have, How do you make a circle? How do you make a square? Why are taller stitches different than short? Just basic knowledge so that, oh, I can look at a pattern and understand why somebody did it this way. People often turn to crochet as an escape from their overwhelmingly stressful lives. And so they don't want to apply, they just want it to be easy and relaxing and, screw all that other, I don't want to, this is an area of my life that I don't want to study and learn. I just want to put on the TV and see pretty things coming off my hook. And I get that. I get it. I've never used it that way. I'm like crazy, What do I do to relax? I read, but I don't craft to relax.
Yeah, I find that's really interesting. I think in my experience, the people who I know who have crocheted for a really long time start eventually thinking outside of the granny square or the amigurumi or smaller bulky weight type projects, which crochet is amazing for. Like, you can't create a cuter stuffed animal than with giant yarn and a crochet hook. But eventually, if you want to make wearables, I think that they'll make something. It's almost like when you start to learn how to knit socks, you have to make a sacrificial sock that's probably not going to fit you, and you just offer it to the sock gods and say, I'm sorry. And then eventually you realize what fits you and what you like. And maybe I come from a different perspective because I live in Florida where it's like 93 degrees outside right now. And so if I were to make a bulky sweater, like, I'm never going to have an opportunity to wear it. So I have to find those patterns and those thinner yarns that automatically have better drape. But if you live in a colder place, you may not have to do that. I also think for a long time, the knitting community really kind of owned a lot of yarn stores, and they were very anti-crochet.
Very anti-crochet. Absolutely. Absolutely. And when I first got into it professionally, I was myself and my designer friends, we had like groups and we were furious, and luckily, this is again some history, but all of a sudden around what years were it, mid 2000s, interweave and all these, the internet was starting to blossom and people were pushing back, and all of a sudden you had an Interweave magazine. I got like, once certain editor took in, I got 2-3 things into every issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I was busting ass, like, to get, of course I was trying to have a career, but also like, no, look what we can do,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't the only one. I mean, there were a whole, Doris Chan and Robin Chichula and Kristen All. I mean, there were some amazing designers. No, and most of them are completely absent from the industry now. We lost an entire generation when digital killed magazines, and they've also killed most books. So I think now we're in a climate where getting the good information is very difficult. There are a lot of people putting it out, but they don't necessarily always know what they're talking about, or it's just one little very narrow thing they're teaching you. Nobody's giving you the broad perspective of like skills. I'm very frustrated. You can hear it, because I'm looking like, all right. And even I have a couple of friends who are big influencers now in crochet, and they're equally frustrated because it's like, how do we transmit this knowledge
Mhm.
to another generation? Um, I hope people buy my book. Every book, I write the same few chapters on sweater fit and measuring yourself. You don't want to measure yourself, measure your darn sweater. Know
Right.
that how many inches you need. And with the knowledge, it's like, we're not afraid of therapy and analyzing our minds and trying to figure out what's going on here. So whatever body you come in, when you go to the store shopping, you're trying to look how to flatter it, right?
Right.
And the same, and the beauty of making your own stuff is you can make that sweater look better than a store-bought sweater if you really know what you're doing.
Mhm. And it can fit you in places that the store-bought sweater won't fit you.
That's
Like
what I'm
I have a
saying.
super long torso.
Me
There, hard
too.
anything I buy at the store is long enough to not ride up when I lift my arms up, and I can fix that when I make my own clothes. I wonder when we were talking about the online kind of removing all of these really valuable people from the industry. To me, it seems like everything you said everything's driven by economics. What gets views on YouTube or on other platforms is often quick, short projects in crochet. And what gets less views and makes therefore less money is a extended tutorial on how to create a garment out of fingering weight yarn that you can add modifications for a bust size or for hips or
Right.
and I
Social
feel
media is not our friend, right?
no,
So
can't
what has
distill
taken
something in
it?
just 60
So
seconds.
what has taken, the question I keep asking is, um, what, how else can information be conveyed today? And, as a musician, as a performer, the same thing happened to the recording industry. I made a
Mhm.
lot of records, I didn't, these are not best, the classical music. I sang with Philip Glass for 10 years. This was my big claim to fame. And we made all these recordings. I was just paid, for being at the recording session, right? I didn't see the royalties. But um, there's no, today, if you're a musician, you cannot make, famous musicians cannot make money selling their records. They have to tour constantly to make a living. So,
Right.
the people who were designers, I started as an already middle-aged person. I'd had a career. But these people that I mentioned, a lot of them were 10, 20 years younger than they switched careers. They were like, I'm not staying here where nobody wants to pay for what I'm doing. You know, I went back I was always teaching singing on the side. And so
Mhm.
as the design work kind of wasn't on the side, I had a regular 2 days a week, full time, college, teaching college kids how to sing. And I loved it. I loved it. And then I had room enough to do the designing, and I'm single without that many demands. So I was just crazy ass doing two careers. And then as the sort of design work fell off, I just took on more teaching.
Mhm.
You know, now what happened, and again, I don't know if we have to put all this in. Last couple of years, I have had a few health issues that made it hard. Teaching singing at the school that I was at was very stressful.
Mm.
So I phased that out, and I was like looking to see how can I earn a little from designing. And I have DoraOhrenstein.com, my indie
Mhm.
patterns. It's killer to attract the audience. And
Mhm.
I don't want to, as an old lady, I don't want to get on camera every day and try to be cute and entertaining. And I think as you get older, you want to focus on what really gives you pleasure. So chasing after views. I mean, I'm doing it. I have to do it now to promote this book, and I want to do it, but um, it's a really different industry, and it's hard. It's tough. I applaud people like you. You do this every day, right?
I don't. This isn't my job at all. I actually am the pastor of a little inclusive church,
Oh, awesome.
and I crochet because I can't sit still.
I see.
And I must be doing something with my hands at all times. And also, I find that for me, crochet is like at the end of a very terrible, horrible, messed up day, like I can still look at what I've made and go, but this is beautiful. And it is a little bit of escapism for me, but it also gives my brain an outlet.
Sure.
But I don't want to, yeah, I do this because I love it, not because it pays me any money. It pays a couple of dollars,
That's
but not
great.
enough, to make it worth it if I didn't love it.
Yes, I hear you. I hear you.
I think also, I mean, everything's moving online and like books, nobody wants a physical book. And like, I find reading fiction online, okay, fine. But for me, having something that I can physically hold and refer back to is invaluable because, and I think that a lot of people who are into fiber arts have more of a visual memory. So their brain thinks in pictures. And when this is why tutorials are so popular because people want to watch it, they want to see it. And if I can remember where something is in this book because I've seen it with my eyes. And I can always have this. I don't have to Google. I don't have to search through 17 blog posts to find something that actually answers my question. It's all consolidated.
So it's very interesting what you just said. You know, as a teacher of singing, I had to contend all the time with people being more visual or being more oral or being more kinesthetic, right? I thought of myself as strictly oral, right? However, I think you're right, a lot of what you said, but I would counter with the following thoughts. A lot of crafters are very tactile.
Oh, yes, yes.
Right? So I want to hold that book and I want to mark up that book and I want to put like circles and, you know, I have Japanese books that are, you know, full of these like places where I stuck, you know, little pieces of tape to come back and look at it years later. And, you know, so I think we should a little bit fight that perception. You sometimes have to sit with a thing and do it if you really want to learn it. And no matter how many times you watch somebody else do it, you're not going to get it until you are willing to sit with it and actually do it, you know.
Yeah, I think that goes
cannot
back.
learn, I don't think you can learn crochet from watching somebody else do it. You can learn a few things. And just to go about why I brought it up with regard to voice teaching. So if I have a really musically talented kid who walks into my studio, doesn't know anything about singing, and I go, oh, right, and they repeat it right away, you know, I know, oh, just can hear. If they start staring at me at the piano or at the piano with great visual intent, I think, oh, this is a looker, a watcher. They want to use their eyes, but it's not going to help them. You know what I mean? So that how I was able to sort people out pretty early on. And I also believe you can train. Like I can now draw. It's not great, but I studied it. I kept doing it. You know, it takes me an hour to get something that looks like a girl in a sweater, but it's how I had to push myself. And now, like in the past, you know, when you're going to sleep and your mind is kind of, I would hear music, I would hear symphonies, I would hear arias. Now I see crochet things and colors. I never thought visually before. And this was as an older person. I hope all these polemics are not boring you, honey. I hope so.
Oh, no. No, I wonder if it kind of goes back to what you said earlier about the people are so afraid to try it and they're just afraid they're going to mess it up. Or for whatever reason, there's this fear around learning new things.
Failure, they don't like to fail.
Right. We don't like to fail. But you have to. Failing is learning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this, yeah, you know, just been listening to a podcast that was all about our age of anxiety, but, you know, and they were talking about, God, what my parents went through and my grandparents, much worse. I mean, I'm not saying we're living in easy times, but yes, people are much more expecting success. We're very success oriented. We're not learning oriented. It's sad. It's a sad thing, but let's move it towards more happy thoughts because, you know.
Well, it's a sad thing. Our brains can change, right? So I don't think because we're acting like that means we're going to act like that forever with the advent of all of this constant information. into our faces at all times. Like, I think the
There really
reasonable
information?
response
I don't think
is to
there's
be anxious.
information. I don't think we're getting information. I think we're getting indoctrination
Right.
is what we're getting. There is, and I think the whole idea that it's information is what's screwing it up. And AI is not actually intelligence. It's just regurgitating other stuff that's already out there, you know. I'm not saying it can't be a tool, but, you know, we're not really understanding what information is in a lot of contexts, you know.
Right. But whatever it is we're receiving is still very overwhelming to
Yeah,
our brains and our nervous systems. And
yeah.
then people turn to crafts to escape and they get stressed out.
Because they're afraid of failing and they don't know how. Maybe we're not teaching people how to learn.
Right. But I always tell people, it's just yarn. It's just yarn. You can rip it out. And especially in regular crochet, it's one stitch at a time. You can handle one stitch at a time. It's not even connected to 100 other stitches on a knitting needle.
Right.
And even in Tunisian crochet, if you have a whole long 200 stitch row of something, it's still only one row you have to rip out if you made a mistake at the beginning of it. And I can just help, I don't know, the whole thing helps me slow down. It's like an active resistance to the nonsense that's like bombarding us all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, you know, there were a couple years when I wasn't doing any professional designing and was either teaching or not teaching that much. And I knew I needed an outlet for my creative energy. So I just made a whole bunch of sweaters for myself, trying all kinds of techniques that I had been afraid to publish because I didn't understand them. Mm-hmm. And I mostly did Tunisian because that was where I finally got a chance. Okay, I haven't really worked on these short row, back neck, you know, how to do the back neck with the short row, you know, all these knitting techniques that couldn't publish because I hadn't done it, you know. And it was really, really cool time for me creatively, you know. We're having such a philosophical conversation, right? But I think, you know, I think what needs to be conveyed to the public is it's creative. It's an outlet for your imagination, your sense of color, you know, and anything that you do, everybody has other parts of their life where they're also creative. How they raise their children, how they cook, what they shop for, right? How they get dressed, how they arrange their house. So, and all of those things you learn over time by going out and screwing it up in some way, right? Ooh, that really doesn't match. So maybe if we can make them see it as a long-term process where you invest the energy and time and allow mistakes, allow errors, because you're going to want to be crocheting for many years. And so to build it, it's a practice. You know, it has to have a sort of a method to it. I like what I'm saying. That has some value, right? Instead of project to project to project, you know, and worrying about each one and whether it's going to come out, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's how I try to touch yarn every day. It doesn't always work out. I have two little kids. Many days, I would say, it doesn't work out. And sometimes when I do, I have to rip it out because I have two little kids. They distracted me. But to take a time, anytime, every day, even if it's a few minutes or if it's an hour, and just say, I get to be creative. And there's no outside expectation. Like, I'm just making something beautiful that may or may not turn out exactly how I want it to, but I made it. Like, it like gives you, what's the word? A boost.
It feeds your many places of your psyche, right? It makes self-satisfaction. And it's the same thing of creativity. Like, you know, I made this from nothing.
Was there any part of the book that was hard to write or that was like particularly challenging?
No, I'll tell you what the most challenging thing is, and it's definitely a Tunisian crochet thing. Gauge. So, and I don't really understand. I still, I'm an expert and I still don't get why. I guess I would say that, those first, not 2 rows, but like 10 rows, like if you're making a top-down thing, those first lot of rows are going to be tighter than what happens after. That's where you're doing your increases and you know what I mean? So one of the very first classes I took, I used to go to the CGOA conferences. And I remember taking a class in Tunisian crochet from a woman who was a well-known designer. And she said, make the switch as big as you can stand to make, And, when you're working on a book, you have a lot of designs to do. You don't always do that. And then too late, you realize, oh my God, I made this whole bottom of this, many inches of this sweater, and it's not the right gauge. So I had to redo a lot of stuff. And another interesting thing that is maybe not quite an answer to your question, but it's sort of an interesting fact about Tunisian that I notice. Sometimes, like I love Tunisian honeycomb stitch, that's what this is. And I tried to use a lot, both the very popular stitches and also introduce some that are not so well known. But every yarn has, may not, even though they're all fingerings, it'll look better with a looser gauge in this yarn. And on this other yarn, it should be tighter. And that's just the visual effect it has. And that has a lot to do with, this is another really interesting topic, how yarns are spun, if they're singles or doubles or what this, earlier I said that crochet has this knotty thing to it. And, a lot of yarns, and I don't know why knitters like it, but you have these really obvious plies. I don't like that in crochet. I find that really is not attractive. So I'm always looking for singles, and then you have this beautiful stitch dictionary definition, So again, another long-winded answer that I hope had something useful.
No, it definitely does. And I heard somewhere, maybe you can tell me if this is accurate, but like most yarn is spun a certain way, which helps knitting. It like benefits knitting, but when you're crocheting it,
or the Y twist, right? That's
you're untwisting it, so it makes it.
Yeah, and I used to know why that is, but I forget. But to me, I have noticed if it's very loosely twisted that it starts to untwist, but most yarns are not that loosely twisted that it matters. But I do feel like I'd like crocheters to pay more attention to the texture of the yarn, the appearance of the yarn. Now, I have noticed that we're a lot more of these what they call microfibers. So, I'm just working on this piece right now. I shouldn't show too much of it because it's for a magazine. But, they look like singles, but they're really not. They're just so many little tiny fibers that it's that more uniform appearance.
Right.
And that I think is beneficial for crochet because the more complicated the surface of the yarn is, the less attractive is the crochet going to be. Now, and the way, that's what I talked about in a book you don't have called Creating Crochet Fabric. And that was like my second book or something, and it was very abstract, too abstract for most crocheters, but that's where I really went into like, look at everything, and notice what you see. And where was I going with this thought? If you have a yarn that's pretty complicated, then you need a really bold stitch pattern with big out. You're not going to be able to do something small like this. You have to do something. This is even without 2 colors. You're going to see that ripple. It's going to overpower any qualities of the yarn. And that's also true when you have like multicolor, yarn that's, what is it called? Variegated yarns, right? If it's self-striping, that's one thing. But if it's constantly changing color, you're not going to see the stitch pattern. it's going to obscure the stitch pattern unless you choose something that goes over many rows and many stitches. Then the stitch pattern will read. Now, are there as many as those in Tunisian? No. Right? That's what regular crochet is great for. The pineapples, and that's how crochet evolved. Historically, they were looking to make little lace collars, and, that was why popularity grew, and it was with the fashion of the times, and, then they became more and more elaborate lace looks, and that's how all these amazing patterns developed in crochet, and these techniques for increasing and decreasing in chains and making pictures with crochet stitches, right? Well, then 50 years pass, or 60, 80 years, and we're working with much heavier yarns. It's not so charming looking, a pineapple stitch with worsted yarn, So I think crochet has had to evolve a lot to keep up with. I think that's how it got a little messed up, going from this thready craft to a yarn craft. But Tunisian has been there all along, and I had a 1920-something book of Tunisian, like, warm socks and sweaters. I mean, it wasn't ever as popular, maybe, or it had its heyday briefly, but it's been there all along. It's been there. So, yeah. I think that's interesting. And a lot of the reason it hasn't gotten sufficient attention is the powers that be, which are the publishers and the yarn company. They have a tendency to want to keep things simple for their audience. It makes their job simpler. Keep it simple. Don't educate them too much. Hate to say these things, but there's truth to it. There's a reason that you only see beginner patterns, and much less cultivation of the more advanced skills.
So this Tunisian book that you've created, is it for someone who has never picked up a Tunisian hook ever, or for someone who maybe has more experience, or like what range of people could benefit?
Do it. I think you have to have some ability to do Tunisian because you have to increase and decrease. Okay. And, you can do a Tunisian simple stitch sweater, and I have at least 2 in there. But I want you to have, at least done a few potholders or something, so that you're confident that you know how to do the stitches and you can regulate tension. I think any needlecraft, knitting, right, you have to have control of your tension. That's why I'm not a good knitter. I haven't figured out the tension. I work very loosely in crochet. I have bad arthritis, so I can't do tight. And with knitting, it becomes a problem for me. So, but I don't think you have to be super advanced. So if you're a knitter who's made a lot of sweaters and you can Tunisian crochet, I think you can do anything in my book. If you're a good crocheter who hasn't done sweaters at all, you can do it, because I have 50 pages of how to make this sweater come out, and it's going to fit you and it's going to do all the things for you. So I think it's for all levels of either, anyone who can do some Tunisian, who's willing to be patient and do a gauge swatch and know their measurements and pick the right size and all those things. And I only have 2 types of sweater constructions in there. Either drop shoulder, means practically no shaping except if it's a V, or top-down raglan. So the constructions are not difficult. Some top-down are not raglan, they're just like circular, So I tried to really keep it simple. I tried to, only have like 2 garments with really what one would consider advanced stitches, but nothing is that hard. What is all these balloons?
You did. It must have thought you did like a thumbs up or something. It's some feature that like it celebrates when it thinks you're celebrating.
That's hilarious. Obviously we need areas where everything's secure and feels safe, definitely. But to color all aspects of life with that brush, that's what saddens me, that when I look at crochet world and, you know, the time that I lived in, that I went through as a beginning professional in it, was so exciting for all of us. Like, you know, I was competitive with these designers, but they were also my friends. And it was like, I want to be as good as Robin, who's trained as an architect, and I don't have that, and I want to be that good, and I want to, you know, and it was a challenge to myself to, but I think I was really fortunate to have these piano lessons from age 8. And you had to sit there at the keyboard as a little kid and learn how to play a better scale, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And I don't think parents do that enough today. I never had kids. I know you're, you know, I saw your videos, you know, I understand, but I think to have a kid just sit alone and solve a problem, and that's telling, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That was what made me the independent person that I became. You know, my mom was in the kitchen in tiny little cramped Queens apartment, and she'd hear me and she'd say, play it again with more feeling, you know, and I figured all that out. So I think that that's why I know what discipline is. I know what concentration is. I really, and they, you know, they have studied musical brains, and it's not bull. It's all true. There is a
Yeah.
difference of musicians who've been studying since they were children in how their brains work. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying it makes them better people, da, 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 but in terms of absorbing information and concentration,
Right.
and you know, music is also has a lot of structure.
Mm-hmm.
I think that has not been sufficiently recognized in all the advice about parenting
Mm-hmm.
that is pushed out nowadays, you know, just learning a task and simple things, you know.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I have 4-year-old and an almost 2-year-old, and my 4-year-old in particular is very hesitant to do a lot of things. And so I've been, since she was born, pushing her out of her comfort zone. And I will admit that I have pushed her too far sometimes because you know, I don't know, like this is my first time doing this, right? But she went off to school 2 days ago, completely confident in who I mean, part of that's her personality. She knows what she wants. But like she is able to do things because I try not to rescue her. If she's doing something dangerous,
Of course.
life threatening, I'll rescue her. But like she'll climb on something. And since she was very small, she even says it herself now. If I can get up, I can get down
That's
because I don't want to save her from that. Now, my 2-year-old, he can get up and he may not be able to get down because he has no fear. He's just He
yeah,
has no sense of self-preservation at all. So it's a very interesting challenge to parent both of them.
I can
But
imagine.
I think that I agree with you. It's not like we need to put more on parents who are already having just the worst time trying to parent in this world. But like, this is where, like, this is how it ties back to crafting. Our kids are going to watch us and they're going to say, oh, I can't figure out that new problem because I've watched my mom or I've watched my dad be like, no, this is too hard. I can't do it. I'm going to give up and I'm going to be frustrated. I'm going to throw it across the room and I'm
Exactly.
not going to take a breath and go back to it. And I've had plenty of projects that have been in timeout for a while because they made me so mad. But I try to go back and say, no, I am an intelligent person. I know I can figure this out.
Right.
And like our kids they do what we do. They don't do what we say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. 100%.
Okay, so I want to respect your time. But I have a couple like quick hit questions. What is your favorite fiber to work with?
So I'm a person who hates to be asked about any kind of favorites because I just don't have any in anything that I work with. I would say but I do like fibers that are good for garments. And I would say all the soft, flexible ones. So merino, alpaca, Pima cotton, silk. If you know, some acrylics are very nice and flexible. I'm not against them. And they certainly make your garments more, you know, long lasting. But if people want to shop for the best garment fabrics, I would say, have a mix of those things, right? So not 100% alpaca or even 100% cotton, which I do sometimes, the best yarns really have been balanced so that the best properties of that yarn are for the garments, And I really think the yarn companies have become better at giving you that information on their websites. So they say, we made this for garments. It has the drape. It has the da-da-da-da. And crocheters should get used to studying that. And it doesn't have to be expensive,
Right.
And I shop a lot of sales myself.
I know you don't like favorites. Is there a Tunisian project that you have made or designed that is just one you reach for more than anything else, or like has a special place in your heart?
I think, and I'm sorry if I feel like I'm being a little obnoxious. Forgive me.
No.
It's because, so I come from this as a musician, and anything that I consider my creative outlet, I take it seriously. And therefore, it would be anathema to me to think there's one thing that I made that's the best thing.
Mm-hmm.
No, what I want to do is constantly, otherwise I get bored. Like I stop. I'm glad I came up with a new idea for a book that's not sweaters, because I need to get out of this, And there are sweaters that I want to make that I cannot publish because they're too complicated for publishing. So, you know what I mean? There are many forces that are working against creativity. I'm always looking to expand how I look at this craft so that I can do more and new, exciting things with it, rather than just repeat the same thing that I've been doing because it's easy or, I already know how. Like, that's not why I do crafting, Or I'm sure there are things in my life that I do over and over the same way because it doesn't interest me to grow, how I make my coffee or, you know what I mean? But where creativity is concerned, I would never hold up, there are things that I'm very proud of having made, and not just one, a bunch. It's like, I did that, like, wow, and that's where I get my kicks, but I would never tell you about which ones those are.
If you had to leave everyone with just like one thing that you'd like them to distill about Tunisian crochet or just about crafting in general, like what is the message from your heart to crafters who are like, I don't know?
Right. Don't be afraid of errors. You said it yourself. Every mistake is a learning opportunity. Never stop growing. Challenge yourself. Find the delight in being puzzled. Go where the questions are.
Yeah. Go where the questions are.
You like it?
I love it.